It can be really tricky and frustrating to find a type of exercise you can actually do to stay fit while your glute tendons are injured without flaring things up and making it worse. So in this video, I'm going to rank different activities from least likely to irritate your glutes to most likely best to avoid. Also, why it might be that they irritate it and how you can adapt it. But then, because every person is different and sometimes people can do exercise that usually doesn't work and it's fine for them, I will explain what elements in general activities are more likely to irritate your glutes that you can keep an eye on that, and how to implement or test new activities so that if they do irritate your tendon, it's just a little bit extra discomfort and not a massive flare up that takes weeks to settle down. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maryke. I'm one of the physiotherapists from sportsinjuryphysio.com, where you can get online physiotherapy assessment as well as treatment of any type of sports injury, all done by a video call. We do specialize in tendons, and if you want to know more about our online service, have a look at the description of this video. I'll put a link to the website there. There are three things when you select an exercise that's worth thinking about that could influence how easily your gluteal tendons gets irritated. Now, these won't affect everybody, and it doesn't mean you've got to avoid them at all cost. It just means that if you do get a flare-up, try to learn from it. Look at what happened, what did I do, why did it cause pain, how could I perhaps have done it differently? Because just because something causes you pain doesn't mean you can't ever do it again. It just means you need to adjust it for now. So the first is the type of activity you choose. Whenever we upright, our gluteal tendons have to work to keep us there. As soon as you do an activity where you have to place all your weight onto one leg, for instance, if you think about walking or running, those gluteal tendons have to work a lot harder. Then, if you add speed to that you have to walk really fast compared to slow, or you run faster compared to slow, the gluteal tendons work even harder. So, starting with activities where you either don't even place all your weight on it, or you don't do too much of the single leg support or too high level of that, can be a good choice. The second thing is how much the glute tendons have to stretch throughout the movement you're doing. Now, the reason stretching is important is because when you move your leg across your body or up and across, you're pulling the gluteal tendons that's injured closer to the bone. Normally, this is not an issue, but when they're injured, it's a bit like pressing on the bruise. And often it can feel really good while you're doing it, but then it causes quite a significant flare-up later on. We have got detailed videos about stretching and why it causes pain and what you can do instead if your glutes are feeling really tight. So have a look at the description of this video. I'll put a link to those there. The third element is simply just doing too much. So you chose a really good type of activity and it doesn't have a lot of stretch in it, but you simply just did either too much of it, too long duration, too high intensity. If you had done slightly less, the gluteal tendons would have coped better with it and it would have been fine. So those are the three elements we're going to look out for when we discuss these things. How much load is actually being put through the tendons during the activity, also how much stretch is involved, and how much is the volume or intensity of it. It's useful to understand what happens to the gluteal tendons to understand how to test a new activity and not flare them up. So the thing to keep in mind is that when your gluteal tendons are injured, they lose a bit of their strength and they become really easy to irritate. And the reason they become so easy to irritate is that the body wants to create pain long before you actually reach a level that will cause damage, so that you actually stop what you're doing and just take the foot off the pedal so that you don't injure it further. And this is important to keep in mind because if you do experience a flare-up, and with gluteal tendinopathy, it's very easy to overstep the mark because it often doesn't tell you in the moment that you've done too much. But if you do experience a flare-up, just keep in mind that the body often increases pain before you actually have had any extra damage there. So it doesn't mean that you've put yourself back to square one. It just means you've kicked off the alarm system. Now, the problem is that this hypersensitized alarm system is often a big part of what causes all the pain and discomfort when you have gluteal tendinopathy. And the more you trigger it and the more you you push into too much pain, the more easily this alarm system sounds. So it's really important when we do activities that we never push it above a certain level, because then everything just becomes more painful and you can do less and less and less, even though your injury doesn't actually get worse, but the pain system just gets more sensitized. Now, if you keep it within that very low level, and then when you get used to it, you just slowly increase it by little bits, the pain system, it's kind of like it goes, well, I'm uncomfortable. I'm not sure if we're doing the right thing. I'm going to cause a little bit of discomfort, but then it sees that actually everything was okay. And this becomes your new limit. And that's how you build resilience and strength over time without actually getting flare ups. So the next time you can do slightly more, or in 2 weeks from now, you can actually do slightly more. And the more that you don't push that pain system into extreme pain, the less sensitive it becomes, because it starts to trust that the body can actually move. So it's really important for one to build strength as well as get the pain system to calm down. Step one is actually figuring out your baseline. What are your pain levels like and how do they react throughout the day if you don't do any exercise or activities that really strain the glutes? Because when you have gluteal tendinopathy, you are going to have pain and discomfort throughout the day. That's just normal. But what we're looking for when we're testing an activity is that we don't want to push the pain above a certain level during an activity, and we want to look at the 24-hour response, because often the gluteal tendons doesn't flare up in the moment, to see how much does it irritate my gluteal tendons above my normal baseline, and then we can decide what is the correct level for you. Once you know your baseline, it's time to test your activity. Now, the first step is to only test a very small session first. And I really want to stress that it should be no more than 10 minutes, because what is an easy session when you're a really fit and uninjured person versus when your glutes are injured and easy to irritate is very different. So whatever new activity you start, just do 10 minutes first. Remember, we want to find that lowest level of exercise that doesn't irritate the tendons, because then we can build from there quickly. But if we jump into high and too much and we cause a flare up, now we've got to wait 3 or 4 weeks before we can get back to actually doing the activity again. And by then you're totally demotivated. So try to be disciplined and not do more than just 10 minutes of an activity, really easy, low intensity, and pick the right activity, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Then, while you're doing the activity, you want to see what happens to your baseline pain. So remember, there's a certain level of discomfort you've now identified as normal for you. It's usually okay if you feel a slight increase above that. So, for instance, normally you're not really uncomfortable during the day that much, or just you're aware of it. Now, it's okay to be a little bit more aware of the discomfort, but as soon as you start classing it as pain, more than just a niggle, more than just being aware of it, then it's likely time to just stop and regroup and see how things react. Now, sometimes when you start an activity, it can feel quite uncomfortable. Just give it a minute or two and see if it wants to warm up, or adjust things to see if you can make it slightly easier to start with, that the tendon gets time to just go, oh, actually we're moving. And then also you have to check the 24-hour pain response, because remember, tendons often only tell you 24 hours later that you've overdone an activity. So typically, you might feel quite good after you've done something, and then a few hours later, you might notice, woof, I'm feeling a little bit more stiff and uncomfortable, as if things worked. And it's okay to feel like that. It's okay to feel that something's actually worked. You can feel your muscles, you can feel your tendon perhaps a little bit, but it's more like a minor discomfort, and it's making you worried. But if you really think about it, it's not really an increase in pain. It's just a slight more discomfort. And the next day, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable as well, a little bit more aware of it. But you can do all your activities without causing an increase of pain, and you don't have to really adjust your life. And importantly, you could sleep relatively comfortably that night. Then it's likely pitched at the right level. But if later that same day, or during the night, or the next day, you're finding that, okay, this is really now bothering me, or I have to adapt what else I do in the day because it's now too annoyed with life, then that was likely too much or the wrong type of activity, and then it needs to be adapted. Yes, the research uses a out of 10 pain scale to judge this. For gluteal tendinopathy, that's not always the most reliable, but if you wanted a number, we like to say keep it at a niggle level only or a slight discomfort, so less than 3 out of 10 discomfort. If you're an endurance athlete who's normally doing lots of exercise, you cannot trust your pain system in that way because you're very good with just getting on with things and ignoring pain. So it's best to use that niggle rule of, am I really more uncomfortable and thinking about this more rather than thinking of how much pain do I feel. But just to highlight this again, increased pain does not mean your injury is necessarily worse. It just means in most cases that you've triggered your pain system, but triggering the pain system on a regular basis isn't useful either because it becomes more sensitized and just creates more pain. Something else that's important to avoid flare-ups is to keep recovery days in mind. Whenever we exercise, we sustain micro-injuries in our tissues, our bones, our muscles, our tendons, anything that has to work. And this is absolutely normal. The body then uses the 24 hours, if it was a hard session, 48 hours afterwards, to repair these micro-injuries. And that's how we grow stronger over time, because the body doesn't just repair them, it realizes that, oh, you need them to be stronger, and it strengthens them even more. So if you continuously do that cycle, allowing enough recovery, that's how you grow stronger. But if you do exercise too often, then it actually doesn't have enough time to recover and repair them, and that's how you end up with overuse injuries like gluteal tendinopathy. So even if your pain responds really well to the first session you test of an activity, if you now do that too many days in a row, then you may actually experience a flare-up. And it's purely because you're not allowing the body to recover. So it's really important to think about how you space things throughout the week. And also, if you're doing activities where you're on your feet when you exercise, like walking, for instance, you have to keep the total time you spend on your feet during the day and during the week in mind, because that all accumulates. It's often not how much you do in a session, but how much you did in that day that can cause the tendons to become overwhelmed. So the best is if you having an easy day for your tendons, you're not having to spend too much time on your feet cooking or cleaning the house to test a new activity on that day, because otherwise you might think that it's the activity that's the problem, but it's actually what else you did in the day. So just keep that in mind. And if you're struggling to make these decisions, it's exactly the type of thing our team is very good at figuring out and working out. How do you space things throughout the week and also the day to not overload your tendon? Swimming is a great option when you have gluteal tendinopathy because you can adapt it in so many different ways. If your gluteal tendons are really irritated with life and doesn't want to allow you any kicking at all, then getting a floating device, squeezing it between your thighs, and just using your arms can be a really good solution. Usually freestyle kicking with straight legs are tolerated better, but it may also be that it doesn't really want you to kick that wildly because that repetitive action can sometimes irritate it. So just doing slow kicking rather than like you would do if you normally swim could be a better option as well. If you really want to do the froggy leg action, that can be problematic if you force it out to do the perfect stroke. So just keep it very easy when you do that you don't really go through it and really do that full circle movement. But like I said, the straight leg kicking is often tolerated better. The hidden factor is that kicking off the wall can often irritate it more than anything else. So make sure that at the start, when you're picking what type of kicking and swimming you can do, you don't kick off from the wall every time you get to the end, so that you can separate the two. Because it might be that the swimming is actually fine, but then every time you kick off the wall, that is the thing that's irritating the gluteal tendons. Now, in theory, cycling should be a very good exercise option for gluteal tendinopathy because it's very low load and you can really play with the resistance that you don't make it too intense. However, despite this, it often irritates people's gluteal tendons. And the main reason for this is the position you're in on the bike plus that repetitive action. So If you think of how bent over you can be when you lean forwards during cycling, that can already cause a low-grade stretch on the gluteal tendons. If your knees come in a bit while you're cycling, that will increase the stretch. And if you add repetitive cycle to that, then it just repeats that movement and that stretch compression action a lot more throughout it. And that can really cause some people's pain to increase. So the first thing to adapt with cycling is to change the position you're in. If you're somebody who uses a racing bike where you're really bent over and you have a tendency to have your knees come in slightly more, see what happens if you switch that out for your mountain bike, or an upright bike in the gym is even better sometimes because you can really control the resistance there. And just see if instead of letting your knees come in slightly, you keep them in a straight line out. Does that make a difference? If you do go to the gym and they have a recumbent bike, that's something to test because that will even reduce the amount of stretch further on the glutes. And sometimes that's actually tolerated better. Obviously, test a short session first, keep the resistance really nice and easy, and only once you've built a good volume of easy, low endurance cycling, start playing with a little bit more extra resistance in there. The elliptical machine, or cross trainer people call it sometimes, is a brilliant option and often tolerated better than walking and running because the machine actually takes your weight. So it does the same action, but it doesn't require you to put all your weight through one leg. And also because of how the machine is, the pedals are spaced, your legs are not crossing in too much either. So especially if you're a runner who finds that you can't run at the moment, doing the cross trainer can be a good option. Again, just think about the resistance you put on that you don't make it too hard a session to start with. Test 10 minutes of a very easy session. Check that 24-hour response we spoke about earlier in the video and see how it reacts to that. Walking can be quite problematic when you have gluteal tendinopathy because you take all your weight onto one leg. And it is one of the things that most people with gluteal tendinopathy report actually irritates their tendons. How much walking a person can do really varies from person to person and depends how irritated that tendon is. But it is the most accessible exercise type out there for everybody, so it's worth talking about. The first thing to keep in mind is that you can't really start walking for exercise if you're not comfortable walking throughout the day and doing your daily activities as you go. And remember, you want to establish your baseline of pain first that you feel when you don't do walking for exercise on top of that. Then the things you want to keep in mind when you test your walking session is obviously a short session first. So you go out for 5 minutes or 10 minutes for an exercise walk. You want to keep it slow. You want to keep it on flat terrain. So avoid really big uphills or downhills. Of course, we can't avoid all hills, but if you do go up or down, then just go slowly because even going down, even though it feels easier, it's the banging, how hard you bang your legs going down that can be an issue there. So just take it easy on the hills. Always build a good volume of slow walking endurance first. So start with very little, build it up until you can do 30 minutes as a leisurely pace. Then you start slowly speeding it up, but you don't go from strolling for 30 minutes to speed walking for 30 minutes. That jump will be too much. You just go to, can I just walk a little bit faster? And maybe not even for the whole bit, maybe just for little bits of it. Until you can walk at a really nice brisk pace for 30 minutes on flat ground without actually experiencing any flare-ups. And once you can do that, then you can start adding in other elements that work it harder, like really giving it a good go up a hill, or just doing longer sessions than 30 minutes as well. So there's many elements to play with, and that's the type of thing we can help people with, is understanding what type of exercise works best, how to put it throughout the week, and how to actually build the tolerance to those exercises as well. An important aspect to keep in mind here is that total time on feet in the week really matters when you're testing walking. So sometimes the walking is absolutely fine, but because you also did that session on a day that you had to spend hours in the kitchen cooking a big family meal, or you just had to be on your feet a lot at work that day, the load from the time on feet for the other reason, plus the walking load, combine to be just too much for the tendons for that day because they only have so much to give in a day, and that made them flare up. So make sure that if you find that, oh, I'm actually really on my feet the whole day already, today's a walking day, but my leg is feeling tired, or I know I've got to do a lot more later today, that's not the day to actually go for your walk. It's really worth postponing it for another day where you don't have that much time on your feet. Running is a relatively high impact activity that works the gluteal tendons quite hard. And most runners will have to adjust how they run or how much they run or how often they run when they have gluteal tendinopathy to help the tendon recover. Not all of them will have to stop running. Some will be able to continue, but everybody usually has to adapt something in their training plan to allow that recovery to take place. If you've not really run before, maybe you've done 1 or 2 runs, but not very regularly, or you've not done any running, it's not the time to start running when you have gluteal tendinopathy. It's best to really build up your walking endurance first, build really good strength through strength training, and then once you're recovered and you can tolerate all of that properly, then you can ease into a running plan slowly and carefully. We have made a detailed video about all the elements you can play with running to allow you to perhaps continue while you're recovering. So if you're interested to understand how your running style is affecting it and what other elements you might want to think about, have a look at the description of this video. I'll put a link to that one there. Of course, there will be exceptions, but the 3 activities that I could think of that tend to, in most cases, flare people's tendons up during the early days include the rowing machine, because despite it being actually a low load activity, you do have to bend your legs quite high up into your chest, which then causes the gluteal tendons to stretch around the bone, and then you really contract them hard to push yourself away, which increases that pressure, and that can really irritate the glute tendons. Also, the stepper machine in the gym, because you can't really adjust the resistance that much. You're going to have to take most of your weight through one leg at a time. And that can often just cause overload because of that repetitive motion as well, and how many times you have to do that to get a good session in. And then also any activity that involves jumping, hopping, skipping, because that loads the gluteal tendons under speed, which often cause a lot more of the micro injuries that we spoke about earlier, which needs more recovery time and is more likely to irritate and overwhelm the tendons. You don't have to avoid these forever, but it's best to leave them for later when you're nearly recovered, to ease into them as a final part of your rehab process. Brilliant. Hope you found that useful. Let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. And if you need more help with your injury, you're welcome to consult one of the team via video call. The link to the website is also in the description of this video. Take care.